The coffin was still warm when Daniel pried it open. Inside, a woman gasped his name, a name she shouldn't have known. "Daniel Cole," she whispered through cracked lips, her eyes wild with terror. "They're coming back for me." His son stood frozen behind him, the Oregon mist swirling around their feet like ghosts. This wasn't a grave. It was a trap. And somewhere in these woods, the men who buried her alive were already hunting. Before today, I'll invite you to follow my story until the end and comment on the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has traveled. The morning Daniel Cole's life shattered for the second time began like any other Saturday in late October. Cold, quiet, and wrapped in the kind of silence that makes a man remember everything he's lost. He stood at the kitchen counter of his small cabin outside Timber Falls, Oregon, watching steam rise from 2 mugs of coffee. One for him. One that would go cold like it did every morning because old habits die harder than the people you make them for. His wife Sarah had been gone for 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Not that he was counting, except he was. Every single morning. "Dad?" The voice broke through his thoughts like a stone through glass. Daniel turned to find his son Eli standing in the doorway, already dressed in his hiking boots and the oversized jacket that had belonged to his mother. At 11 years old, the boy was beginning to look more like Sarah every day. Same dark eyes, same stubborn set to his jaw, same way of tilting his head when he was worried about something. "You okay?" Eli asked, his voice careful in the way children's voices become when they've learned that adults break easier than they admit. Daniel forced a smile, the kind that probably didn't reach his eyes but was all he had to offer these days. "Yeah, buddy, just thinking. You ready for our hike?" "Been ready for an hour," Eli said, and there was something in his tone, not quite accusation, not quite concern, that made Daniel's chest tighten. The kid was growing up too fast, becoming too aware of his father's ghosts. "Then let's get moving before the whole day disappears," Daniel said, dumping the second cup of coffee down the sink. The waste of it felt symbolic somehow, but he couldn't quite articulate why. They loaded into Daniel's beaten Ford pickup, a truck that had seen better years but refused to die, much like its owner. The drive to Whispering Pines Trail took 20 minutes, winding through evergreen forest that seemed to close in tighter with each passing mile. Fall had painted the landscape in shades of rust and gold, and morning fog clung to the valley floor like something alive. Daniel had chosen this trail deliberately. It was isolated, rarely used, and far enough from town that they wouldn't run into anyone he knew. After Sarah's death, Timber Falls had become a minefield of sympathetic glances and well-meaning questions he didn't have the strength to answer. Out here, in the woods, there were no casseroles, no invitations to church, no neighbors asking if he was doing okay when the answer was obviously, devastatingly no. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Eli's voice cut through the rumble of the truck's engine. "Shoot. Do you think Mom would have liked me playing soccer?" The question landed like a punch to the gut. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. "Your mom would have been proud of you no matter what you did. You know that, right?" "But soccer specifically," Eli pressed, staring out the window at the passing trees. "Coach Bennett says I'm pretty good. Says I could maybe play competitive next year." Daniel felt the familiar ache bloom in his chest, the one that came every time Eli mentioned something Sarah would never see. His son's first goal, his first school dance, his graduation, all of it. An entire future, stolen by a drunk driver who'd walked away from the crash with nothing but a suspended license. "She would have been at every game," Daniel said quietly. "Front row. Probably embarrassing you with one of those giant foam fingers." Eli smiled a little at that, and Daniel counted it as a victory. Small moments. That's all they had now. Small moments stitched together into something resembling a life. The parking lot at Whispering Pines was empty when they arrived, just as Daniel had hoped. He killed the engine, and for a moment they sat in silence, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the distant call of a crow. "It's pretty out here," Eli said. "Your mom and I used to come here," Daniel admitted, "before you were born. She loved these woods, said they made her feel small in a good way, like her problems weren't as big as she thought." "Did it work?" "Sometimes." Daniel grabbed their backpack from the truck bed. "Come on, let's see if the magic's still here." The trail started easy, a well-worn path through Douglas firs and western hemlocks, their branches creating a cathedral ceiling overhead. Eli walked ahead, occasionally bending to examine a mushroom or an interesting rock, and Daniel followed, grateful for the distraction of nature. Out here, he didn't have to be the grieving husband or the struggling single father. Out here, he could just be a man walking through trees. They'd been hiking for maybe 40 minutes when Daniel heard it. At first, he thought it was nothing, just the sound of the forest settling, branches rubbing together in the wind. But then it came again, a rhythmic thudding, faint but distinct. Metal on wood. Deliberate. "You hear that?" Daniel asked, stopping mid-stride. Eli paused, cocking his head. "Hear what?" "That sound, like—" Daniel trailed off, listening. There it was again, thud, thud, thud. Like someone hammering something. "Maybe it's another hiker?" Eli suggested, but his voice carried an edge of uncertainty. "Out here?" "Doubtful." Daniel adjusted the pack on his shoulders. "Stay close to me, okay?" They left the main trail, following the sound through increasingly dense underbrush. Branches snagged at their clothes, and the morning mist seemed to thicken as they went, reducing visibility to maybe 20 feet in any direction. The sound grew louder, more insistent, and with it came a feeling Daniel couldn't quite name, something primal and wrong that made the hair on his neck stand up. "Dad, maybe we should go back," Eli said, his earlier bravado evaporating. "Just a little further," Daniel assured him, though he wasn't sure why he was pushing forward. Curiosity? Concern? Some stupid masculine instinct that demanded he investigate rather than retreat? Whatever it was, it pulled him deeper into the woods. The sound stopped. They stood in a small clearing surrounded by ferns and rotting logs, and the sudden silence was somehow worse than the noise had been. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest as his eyes scanned the area, looking for the source. That's when he saw it. At first, it looked like just another fallen log, half buried in the muddy earth near a cluster of mossy boulders. But logs didn't have corners, logs didn't have iron latches, and logs definitely didn't have the shape of something designed to hold a human body. "Is that—" Eli's voice was barely a whisper. "Stay here," Daniel ordered, his carpenter's brain already cataloging details. The coffin, because that's what it was, there was no mistaking it, was simple construction. Pine, maybe cedar. Homemade, judging by the rough joinery visible where mud hadn't yet covered it. Recently buried, too. The earth around it was still loose, not yet settled. Daniel approached slowly, his boots squelching in the wet soil. The coffin was about 6 feet long, 2 feet wide, and secured with 3 iron latches along one side. Someone had gone through considerable effort to bury it here, in this isolated spot, miles from any road or trail. "Dad, this is crazy," Eli hissed from behind him. "We should call someone." "Call who?" "We're 20 minutes from the nearest cell signal." Daniel crouched beside the coffin, running his hand along the wood. It was cold, damp, and absolutely terrifying in its ordinariness. This wasn't some elaborate Halloween decoration. This was real. He pressed his ear against the lid, listening. Nothing. Then, a moan, soft, weak, but unmistakably human. "Jesus Christ," Daniel breathed, jerking back. "What? What is it?" Eli rushed forward despite his fear. "There's someone inside," Daniel said, his mind racing. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen. People didn't just stumble across buried coffins with living people inside them. This was Oregon, not some horror movie. Another sound from within. A weak scratching like fingernails against wood. "Dad, we have to—" "I know." Daniel cut him off, already searching the ground for something to use. He found a fallen branch, solid and thick, and wedged it under the first latch. "Eli, I need you to help me. On 3, we pry this open together." "Shouldn't we—" "On 3, Daniel repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. 1, 2, 3. They threw their weight against the branch. The latch groaned, rusted metal protesting, then popped free with a crack that echoed through the forest. The second latch went easier, and by the third, Daniel's hands were shaking so badly he could barely grip the branch. "Stand back," he told his son. Eli retreated a few steps, his face pale in the morning light. Daniel grabbed the edge of the coffin lid and pulled. It resisted, swollen from moisture, then gave way with a sound like tearing fabric. The smell hit him first: sweat, fear, and something coppery that he recognized as blood. Then he saw her. A woman lay inside, her body twisted at an uncomfortable angle, her wrists bound with what looked like torn strips of cloth. She was maybe 40 years old, with dark hair matted with mud and skin the color of old paper. Her eyes were closed, her chest barely moving, and for a horrible moment Daniel thought they were too late. Then her eyes opened. They fixed on him with an intensity that made him flinch, dark brown eyes, bloodshot and wild, filled with terror so absolute it seemed to drain the warmth from the morning air. "Help!" The word came out as barely a croak, her lips cracked and bleeding. "Help me!" "We've got you," Daniel said, his carpenter's hands already working at the bindings on her wrists. They were tight, cutting into her skin, tied by someone who knew what they were doing. "We're going to get you out of here." "Daniel," the woman whispered. He froze, his fingers still working at the knots. "What?" "Daniel Cole." Her eyes rolled back, showing white, then focused on him again with tremendous effort. "They're coming back. They think I'm dead." Ice water flooded Daniel's veins. "How do you know my name?" But the woman's eyes had closed again, her head lolling to the side. For a terrifying second, Daniel thought she'd died right there in his arms, but then he felt the faint flutter of a pulse at her throat. "Dad?" Eli's voice was high and tight with panic. "Dad, how does she know your name?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted, finally working the last knot free. The woman's wrists were raw and bleeding where she'd struggled against the bindings. He scooped her out of the coffin. She was lighter than expected, all bone and dehydration, and cradled her against his chest. "But right now, we need to get her out of these woods." "What if whoever did this comes back?" It was the question Daniel had been trying not to think about. Whoever had buried this woman had done so recently. The earth was still fresh. The body was still alive, which meant the people responsible might still be nearby, might still be watching. "Then we move fast," Daniel said, starting back through the underbrush toward the trail. "Eli, stay right behind me. Don't stop for anything." They ran. Daniel had always considered himself reasonably fit. Carpentry kept a man strong, and grief had a way of turning sleepless nights into early morning workout sessions. But carrying a 120-pound woman through dense forest while your 11-year-old son gasped for breath behind you redefined the limits of endurance. Branches whipped at his face. Roots tried to trip him. The woman's dead weight kept threatening to slip from his grasp, and every few seconds he had to adjust his grip, feeling her ribs through her soaked clothing, the desperate fragility of a body pushed to its absolute limit. "Almost there," he panted, though he had no idea if that was true. The mist had disoriented him, and in his panic to flee, he wasn't entirely sure they were heading in the right direction. Then, blessed mercy, he saw the truck through the trees. "Eli, get the doors!" Daniel shouted. His son sprinted ahead, yanking open the truck's rear passenger door. Daniel practically fell into the back seat, laying the woman across it as gently as his shaking arms allowed. She moaned softly, one hand twitching against the upholstery. "Blanket in the back," Daniel gasped, pointing to the truck bed. "And the first aid kit." While Eli retrieved them, Daniel checked the woman's vitals. Pulse weak but steady, breathing shallow, skin cold and clammy. She needed a hospital, needed it yesterday, but the nearest emergency room was 40 minutes away, and Daniel had no idea what he'd tell them when he got there. "I found her buried alive in a coffin in the woods, and by the way, she knows my name even though I've never seen her before in my life." "Yeah, that would go over great." "Here." Eli thrust the blanket and kit at him, his hands trembling. Daniel wrapped the blanket around the woman, then started cleaning the wounds on her wrists with antiseptic wipes. The cuts were deep, infected, made worse by her struggles against the bindings. She'd fought hard. Whatever else had happened to her, she'd fought like hell to survive. "Daniel." Her voice was so soft he almost missed it. "You saved me." He leaned closer, his heart hammering. "Who are you? What happened?" Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on him with enormous effort. "You don't remember?" "Remember what?" "I've never met you before." 15 years. A tear tracked through the mud on her face. "You built the door." "What door?" "I don't understand." But she was fading again, her eyes losing focus. Daniel finished bandaging her wrist, then climbed into the driver's seat, his mind spinning. 15 years ago. He would have been, 25? 26? Working construction all over the state, taking whatever jobs he could get before he'd met Sarah. Before everything in his life had settled into the shape of the family he'd eventually lose. "Dad, where are we going?" Eli asked from the passenger seat, his voice small. "Good question." Hospital meant police, meant questions Daniel couldn't answer, meant potential danger if whoever had buried this woman was still looking for her. But his cabin was isolated, off the grid, and he had enough medical supplies from his construction days to handle basic emergency care. "Home," Daniel decided, turning the key in the ignition. "We're going home." The drive back was the longest 20 minutes of Daniel's life. Every car that passed going the opposite direction made his pulse spike. Every shadow in the rearview mirror looked like pursuit. The woman in the back seat drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling words he couldn't quite make out. When they finally pulled up to the cabin, Daniel carried her inside and laid her on the couch, the same couch where he'd held Sarah during her last days, where they'd watched movies and pretended that time wasn't running out. The irony wasn't lost on him, this strange woman bleeding onto the same cushions where his wife had wasted away. "Eli, I need you to do something for me," Daniel said, grabbing his medical kit, a much better one than what he kept in the truck. "I need you to heat up some water as much as you can. She's dehydrated, maybe hypothermic. We need to warm her up slowly." His son nodded, grateful for a task, and disappeared into the kitchen. Daniel set to work. He'd learned basic field medicine during his construction days. Job sites were always miles from help, and someone had to know how to handle an emergency. He cleaned her wounds more thoroughly, applied antibiotic ointment, wrapped them in proper gauze, checked her for broken bones, found none, examined her pupils, her reflexes, the color of her gums. She'd been in that coffin for days, he realized. Maybe 3, maybe 4. Long enough to dehydrate dangerously, to develop infections, to come within hours of dying, but not quite long enough to kill her. Someone had wanted her to suffer. "Here," Eli appeared with a bowl of warm water and a clean cloth. "Good man," Daniel said, using the cloth to clean the mud and blood from the woman's face. Features emerged slowly, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, a small scar above her left eyebrow. She might have been beautiful once, before terror had hollowed her out. As he worked, she stirred, her eyes opening again. This time they were clearer, more focused, though still glazed with pain. "Where?" she croaked. "My cabin," Daniel said. "You're safe. I'm Daniel Cole. This is my son, Eli." "I know who you are," she whispered, and the words sent ice down his spine. "Then you have me at a disadvantage." "Rebecca," she said. "Rebecca Walsh." The name meant nothing to him. "Rebecca, who did this to you? Who buried you?" Fear flickered across her face, so intense it was almost physical. Don't call the police." "You were buried alive. We need to—" "No," she insisted, trying to sit up and failing. "They'll find me. They have people everywhere. Police, hospitals, everywhere." "They? Who's they?" Rebecca closed her eyes, and for a moment Daniel thought she'd passed out again. But then she spoke, her voice barely audible. "The same people you helped put away 15 years ago. The ones from the safe house raid in Portland. You don't remember, but you saved me once already. You built the door that let me escape." Memory tugged at Daniel, vague and uncertain. 15 years ago, he'd worked on a renovation project in southeast Portland, some kind of residential facility. He'd replaced doors, fixed windows, reinforced locks. The client had been cagey about details, but the pay had been good, and Daniel hadn't asked questions. "The trafficking ring," Rebecca continued, her voice stronger now, fueled by fear. "You worked on the safe house, the one where women were relocated after raids. I was one of them. You installed my bedroom door, white oak, brass handle, deadbolt on the inside. You told me—" She swallowed hard. "You told me it was the strongest door you knew how to build, and that nothing could get through it without my permission." Daniel's breath caught. He did remember that. Remembered the young woman with haunted eyes who'd watched him work, who'd asked if the door would really keep her safe. He'd promised her it would, had personally triple-checked every screw and hinge. Jesus, he breathed. You're the girl from the safe house. They found me 6 months ago, Rebecca said. The people who took me originally, they never forgot. And they never forgave. They wanted to know where the others were hiding, wanted names, locations. When I wouldn't tell them, her hand went to her throat, where Daniel could now see bruises. They decided to make an example of me by burying you alive. They said I'd already talked once, sent people to prison so they'd bury me like I'd buried their operation. Poetic justice, they called it. Tears welled in her eyes. They said no one would find me, that I'd die alone in the dark, just like they died in prison. Eli had gone very quiet, standing near the kitchen doorway with wide eyes. Daniel met his son's gaze and saw the question there. What have we gotten ourselves into? How did you escape? Daniel asked, though he knew the answer. She hadn't. They'd found her. I didn't, Rebecca confirmed. They buried me yesterday afternoon, said they'd come back in a week to make sure I was really dead. A broken laugh escaped her. Guess they wanted to be thorough. You were supposed to die in that coffin. Yes? But you didn't. Because of you, Rebecca said, her eyes meeting his with intensity that made him uncomfortable. Because 15 years ago, a carpenter took an extra hour to make sure a stranger's door was perfect. Because that kindness made me believe the world had good people in it. Because I remembered you, Daniel Cole. And I decided if I was going to die, I'd die trying to survive. She touched the bandages on her wrists. I worked at the bindings for hours. Broke the skin, probably got infected, but I got them loose enough to move. Then I started pounding on the lid. Not to escape. I knew I couldn't break through. But because if I was going to die, I wanted to die making noise. Wanted someone, anyone, to know I'd been there. And we heard you, Daniel said quietly. And you heard me, Rebecca agreed. Of all the people who could have been walking through those woods today, it was you. The same man who saved me once already. What are the odds? Daniel didn't believe in fate, hadn't since Sarah's death had proven that the universe was arbitrary and cruel. But looking at this woman on his couch, he had to admit the coincidence strained credibility. What happens now? Eli asked, his voice startling them both. It was the question Daniel had been avoiding. Rebecca was clearly terrified, convinced that calling the police would only alert whoever had buried her. But they couldn't just hide her in his cabin indefinitely. And if her captors really were coming back in a week to check on her body, they'd discover the empty coffin and know she'd escaped. I don't know, Daniel admitted. They'll realize I'm gone, Rebecca said, voicing his thoughts. They'll come looking. How many of them are there? 3 that I saw, maybe more. They work for someone bigger, but I never saw the boss. Just the 3 men who took me. Did they know about this cabin? I don't think so. They grabbed me in Portland, held me in some warehouse. I didn't see much during transport. They kept me blindfolded. So we might have time, Daniel reasoned. Time to figure out what to do, where to hide you. I can't ask you to... You're not asking, Daniel cut her off. You're in my house. You're my responsibility now. Rebecca's eyes filled with fresh tears. Why? Why would you help me again? It was a fair question, and Daniel didn't have a good answer. The smart thing would be to drive her to the nearest police station, make a statement, and wash his hands of the whole situation. Let the proper authorities handle it. Keep himself, and especially Eli, out of whatever nightmare Rebecca had brought to his doorstep. But then he looked at his son, standing there in his mother's oversized jacket, and remembered something Sarah had said near the end. The world's going to try to make you bitter, Danny. Don't let it. Don't let my death turn you into someone who looks away. Because it's the right thing to do, Daniel said finally, and because my wife would have. He stood, his knees protesting. You should rest. I'll make you something to eat, something light. Eli, help me in the kitchen? They left Rebecca on the couch and moved to the small kitchen, where Daniel started pulling out ingredients for soup. His hands were shaking, he realized. Adrenaline crash, probably. The enormity of what they'd found, what he'd agreed to, was starting to sink in. Dad, Eli whispered, are we in danger? Daniel wanted to lie, to tell his son everything would be fine. But he'd promised himself after Sarah died that he'd never lie to Eli, not about the big things. Maybe, he admitted. Probably. These people buried a woman alive, Eli. That's not something people do lightly. Should we call the police anyway? I don't know. If Rebecca's right, if they really have people in law enforcement, then calling the police might just get her killed faster. And us too, for helping her. Eli processed this, his young face serious beyond his years. But we can't just do nothing. No, Daniel agreed. We can't. They made soup in silence, canned chicken noodle, nothing fancy, but hot and nourishing. When Daniel brought a bowl out to Rebecca, he found her asleep, her breathing more regular now. He set the soup on the coffee table and covered her with an extra blanket. That's when he noticed the window. One of the cabin's 3 windows overlooked the driveway, and through it Daniel could see tire tracks in the muddy ground, his truck's tracks from earlier. But there was another set too, fresher, leading from the main road to a point about 30 yards from the cabin before circling back. Someone had been here. Daniel's blood turned to ice. He moved quickly to the front door, checking the lock, still secure, then to the back door, also locked. But when he examined the ground outside the back door, he found them. Fresh boot prints in the soft earth. Someone had walked around his cabin, had looked in the windows, had gotten close enough to touch the walls. Eli, he called softly, trying to keep the panic from his voice. Come here, buddy. His son appeared, still holding a bowl of soup. Yeah? I need you to do exactly as I say. Go to your room, grab your emergency bag, the one we packed for earthquakes, and bring it here. Don't turn on any lights. Move quietly. Eli's eyes went wide. Dad! Now, Eli. The boy disappeared down the hallway, and Daniel moved back to Rebecca, shaking her shoulder gently. Rebecca, wake up. Her eyes snapped open, immediately alert. What? Someone's been here, circled the cabin. They might still be watching. Oh, God, Rebecca breathed. They found me. They found me already. We don't know that for sure, Daniel said, though his gut told him otherwise. But we need to be ready to move if... Headlights swept across the window. They both froze, watching as a dark SUV pulled into the driveway, moving slowly, deliberately. It stopped about 20 feet from the front door, engine idling. The headlights died, but nobody got out. How many guns do you have? Rebecca whispered. 1, Daniel said. My wife's revolver. 5 rounds. Get it. Daniel moved to the bedroom, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. Sarah's revolver was in the closet, in a locked box on the top shelf. His hands fumbled with the combination, 2361 Eli's birthday, and finally the lock clicked open. The gun was exactly where he'd left it 2 years ago, cleaned and loaded, a weapon Sarah had insisted they keep after a break-in at their old house. I hope we never need it, she'd said. But better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Daniel checked the cylinder. 5 rounds, just like he'd remembered. Not enough if there were 3 men out there, not even close to enough. When he returned to the living room, Eli was there with his emergency bag, his face pale but composed. Rebecca had struggled into a sitting position, her eyes fixed on the window. They're just sitting there, she said, waiting. Waiting for what? To see if we run, or to see if we call the police. They want to know what we know. As if in response, the SUV's door opened. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap pulled low. He didn't approach the cabin, just stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at the front door. Then he raised one hand and tapped his wrist. The gesture was clear, time's running out. They're going to come in, Rebecca said, her voice flat with certainty. Any minute now, they're going to come in, and they're going to kill all of us. Daniel's mind raced. The cabin had 3 rooms, the main living area, 1 bedroom, and Eli's smaller room. The bedroom had a window, but it faced the driveway, right where the SUV was parked. Eli's room had no window at all, which had seemed like a safety feature when they'd moved in, but now felt like a death trap. The only other exit was the back door, which led into dense forest. We run, Daniel decided, out the back into the woods. We know this area, they don't. We'll never make it, Rebecca said. I can barely walk. Then I'll carry you. Daniel, I didn't save you from that coffin just to let you die in my living room, Daniel snapped. Then, softer. "We're getting out of here. All of us." He moved to the back door, unlocking it as quietly as possible. The man from the SUV was still standing there, watching the front. But where were the other two? Rebecca had said there were three. His question was answered a moment later when something crashed through the kitchen window. The sound was deafening, glass exploding inward, followed by a heavy thud as something hit the floor. Daniel's mind registered it before his body could react. A brick, wrapped in paper. "Move!" he shouted, grabbing Eli with one hand and Rebecca with the other, practically dragging them toward the back door. Behind them, the front door splintered. Someone was kicking it in, the cheap lock no match for determined force. Daniel got the back door open, shoved Eli through first, then helped Rebecca stumble after him. He paused long enough to grab the brick from the kitchen floor. Some instinct told him the paper wrapped around it was important, then followed them into the night. The Oregon forest at dusk was a maze of shadows and twisted roots. Daniel had hunted these woods, knew them as well as anyone could, but that knowledge felt useless now, with Rebecca barely able to walk and Eli struggling to keep up. "This way," Daniel hissed, leading them north, away from the cabin. Behind them, he could hear shouting, could see flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. 3 beams, he counted. 3 men, just like Rebecca had said. They crashed through the underbrush, making too much noise, leaving too clear a trail. Rebecca was leaning heavily on Daniel, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Eli was in front, the emergency bag bouncing on his back. "Dad, I can't." "Keep going," Daniel urged. "Just a little further." But further to where? They were running blind, literally and figuratively, into dark woods with armed men behind them and no plan beyond get away. This wasn't sustainable. Rebecca was slowing them down, not her fault, but a fact, and the men chasing them had flashlights, probably guns, definitely the advantage. Daniel's foot caught on a root, and he went down, taking Rebecca with him. They hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs. The brick flew from his hand, landing a few feet away in the ferns. "Dad!" Eli skidded to a stop, turning back. "I'm okay," Daniel gasped, struggling to his feet. He helped Rebecca up. She was trembling. Whether from fear or exhaustion or cold, he couldn't tell. That's when he heard it, running water. "This way," he said, changing direction toward the sound. There was a creek that ran through these woods, one he'd fished with Eli during summer. If they could reach it, they could follow it downstream, let the water cover their tracks. The creek appeared out of the darkness like salvation, maybe 15 feet across, shallow enough to wade, but deep enough to hide their footprints. Daniel splashed into it, the shock of cold water driving through his boots. Eli followed, then Rebecca, all 3 of them moving downstream as quickly as the rocky bottom would allow. Behind them, the flashlight beams converged on where they'd been moments ago. Daniel could hear voices, angry and frustrated. They'd lost the trail. "They've gone to ground," one voice called. "Fan out! They can't have gone far." Daniel pulled Rebecca and Eli under an overhanging bank, pressing them both against the muddy wall. They were partially hidden here, the water flowing past their waist, the bank above providing some cover. If the searchers didn't look directly down, footsteps approached the creek bank. A flashlight beam played across the water, searching. Daniel held his breath, felt Eli doing the same beside him. Rebecca's hand found his in the darkness and squeezed. The beam moved on. "Nothing here," the voice said. "Check upstream." The footsteps retreated. They stayed frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, listening to the searchers move through the woods, their voices growing fainter. Finally, when Daniel's legs were going numb from the cold and he couldn't hear anyone nearby, he risked speaking. "We need to keep moving, put more distance between us and them." "I can't," Rebecca whispered. "I'm sorry, I can't." She was right. Daniel could see it even in the limited moonlight. She was shaking badly now, her lips blue, her eyes unfocused. Hypothermia was setting in, the cold water accelerating what her days in the coffin had started. "There's a hunting blind," Eli said suddenly. "Remember, Dad? About a mile downstream. The one we found last summer." Daniel did remember. An old, half-collapsed structure someone had built years ago and then abandoned. It wasn't much, but it would be shelter, would be somewhere to stop and think. Can you make it a mile? He asked Rebecca. Do I have a choice? No, Daniel admitted. Not really. They moved through the water, following the creek downstream. Every step was agony, the cold, the fear, the exhaustion of carrying Rebecca when she stumbled. But they moved because stopping meant dying, and Daniel had already lost too much to death. He wouldn't lose more. Not tonight. The hunting blind appeared like a miracle, a small wooden structure built into the hillside, most of its roof intact, its walls still solid enough to provide concealment. Daniel helped Rebecca inside first, then Eli, then collapsed beside them on the dirt floor. For a long moment, none of them spoke. They just sat there in the darkness, listening to each other breathe, listening for footsteps that didn't come. Finally, Eli spoke. What was on the brick? The brick. Daniel had almost forgotten. He'd dropped it when they fell, but no. There it was, still somehow in his jacket pocket. He must have grabbed it without thinking. He pulled it out, unfolding the damp paper wrapped around it. In the faint moonlight filtering through gaps in the blind's roof, he read, We know you're Daniel Cole. We know you have our property. Return her by midnight, or we start with the boy. Below the typed message was an address in Timber Falls. And below that, a photo, clearly taken with a telephoto lens through his cabin window earlier that evening. A photo of Eli. The photograph trembled in Daniel's hands, not from the cold of the creek water still dripping from his clothes, but from something much deeper. A father's primal terror at seeing his child transformed into a target. In the grainy telephoto image, Eli stood at the cabin window, his face partially obscured by reflection, but unmistakably him, unmistakably vulnerable. The timestamp in the corner read 6:47 p.m., barely 2 hours ago, when they'd first brought Rebecca inside. Let me see, Rebecca whispered, reaching for the paper. Daniel jerked it away, a reflexive gesture that surprised even him. No. Daniel! They photographed my son. His voice came out flat, emotionless, which scared him more than if he'd shouted. They came to my home and they photographed my 11-year-old son, and now they're threatening to... He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't make the words real by speaking them aloud. Eli had gone very still beside him, that particular stillness children achieve when they're trying to become invisible. Dad? It's okay, buddy. The lie tasted like ash. We're going to figure this out. They want me by midnight, Rebecca said quietly. That's less than 4 hours from now. Then we have 4 hours to come up with a plan that doesn't involve feeding you to wolves. I'm not worth your son's life. Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her. This woman who'd survived being trafficked, who'd survived being buried alive, who'd clawed through bound wrists and wooden coffin in 3 days of darkness because 15 years ago a carpenter had taken extra time on a door. She was shaking from cold and fear and exhaustion, but her eyes were clear. She meant what she said. She would walk back to those men right now if she thought it would save Eli. Nobody's dying tonight, Daniel said with more certainty than he felt. Not you, not us. We just need to think. They know where you live, Rebecca pointed out. They know your name, your son's face. Even if we run, even if we hide, they'll find us eventually. These people don't give up. I'm proof of that. She was right, and Daniel knew it. The smart play, if there was such a thing in this nightmare, would be to take what they knew to the police right now, consequences be damned. But then he thought about the note's specific phrasing. We know you have our property. Not the woman, not Rebecca Walsh. Property. These men saw people as commodities, which meant they'd have no hesitation about making good on their threat if Daniel called in law enforcement. What about the FBI? Eli asked. His voice was small but steady, and Daniel felt a surge of pride mixed with guilt that his son had to be brave right now, had to be thinking tactically when he should be thinking about soccer games and homework. Aren't they supposed to handle trafficking cases? The boy's right, Rebecca said. There's a task force. I testified to them years ago when they broke up the original ring, but that was before... She stopped abruptly. Before what? Daniel pressed. Before half the agents on the case were reassigned or retired or disappeared. The whole investigation fell apart about 5 years back. New leadership came in, priorities shifted, and suddenly nobody wanted to touch human trafficking cases anymore. Funding dried up. Witnesses started recanting their testimony. Her voice went bitter. Funny how that happens when the right people get paid off or threatened. So the FBI is compromised too. I don't know about compromised, but I know they're not reliable. Not for this. Daniel's mind raced through options, discarding each one as quickly as it formed. Run. But to where? These men had found Rebecca 6 months after she'd gone underground. Call the police, but risk Eli becoming collateral damage. Go to the FBI, but maybe walk straight into the arms of the same people they were running from. Give Rebecca up? Absolutely not, though the rational part of his brain whispered that it was the safest play for his son. There has to be someone, he said finally. Someone you trusted from before. Someone who helped you the first time. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. There was one agent, she said slowly. Sandra Martinez. She was young then, just starting out, but she believed us when nobody else did. She's the one who set up the Safe House program, who personally vetted every contractor who worked on it. Her eyes found Daniel's, including you. She's the reason I remember your name. She showed me the files on everyone who'd be in the building, told me to memorize faces in case something went wrong. Is she still with the Bureau? Last I heard, yes. But Daniel, I haven't spoken to her in almost a decade. I don't even know if she'd remember me. Then we make her remember. Daniel pulled out his phone, saw what he'd feared. No signal. They were too deep in the woods, too far from any cell tower. We need to get somewhere with reception. The men who are hunting us also have phones, Rebecca pointed out. If we go near town, near any main road, we're exposed. There's old fire lookout tower, Eli said. The one on Buckhorn Ridge. It's abandoned, but it's high enough we might get a signal. Daniel knew the tower, a rickety structure about 2 miles north, built in the 1970s and decommissioned when the Forest Service upgraded to satellite monitoring. He and Sarah had hiked up there once, back when she was healthy, back when they'd thought they had forever. The memory stabbed at him, but he pushed it aside. No time for ghosts right now. That's at least an hour's hike in the dark, he said. Maybe more with... He gestured at Rebecca's condition. I'll make it, she said firmly. I didn't survive that coffin just to slow you down now. Dad, what about the address? Eli pointed at the note. The place they want us to bring her. Shouldn't we at least know where it is? Daniel read the address again, 22847 Industrial Way, Timber Falls. He knew that area. Old warehouses near the lumber mill, most of them abandoned since the mill had downsized in the recession. Perfect place for the kind of people who buried women alive. We're not going there, he said. Not unless we have backup and a plan. So we call this Agent Martinez and tell her what? Rebecca asked. That some men are threatening a carpenter and his kid unless they hand over a woman they buried alive? She'll think we're crazy. Maybe. Or maybe she'll recognize your name and realize the trafficking case she worked 15 years ago isn't as dead as everyone thought. It was thin, Daniel knew. Thin as tissue paper, with about as much chance of holding up under pressure. But it was something. And something was infinitely better than nothing when the alternative was watching the clock tick down to midnight while his son's life hung in the balance. Let's move, he said, struggling to his feet. His legs protested. They'd been crouched in the cold water for too long, and his muscles had stiffened. Rebecca fared worse, nearly collapsing before Daniel caught her. Easy, we'll take it slow. We don't have time for slow, she muttered, but she leaned on him heavily as they emerged from the hunting blind. The forest at night was a different creature than by daylight. Every shadow held menace. Every snapping twig sounded like footsteps. Every bird call might have been a signal between hunters. Daniel led them northeast, away from the creek, up the gradual slope that would eventually become Buckhorn Ridge. The going was treacherous in the darkness. Roots wanted to trip them. Branches wanted to blind them. And the mud from recent rain made every step uncertain. Eli moved ahead, using his phone's flashlight in brief, cautious bursts to illuminate the path. Daniel had told him to be sparing with it. Light carried in the dark, could be seen from hundreds of yards away. But his son had the good sense to use it only when absolutely necessary. Another thing the boy had learned too young: how to be careful, how to calculate risk, how to survive. They'd been climbing for maybe 20 minutes when Rebecca stumbled badly, her ankle turning on loose rock. Daniel caught her before she went down completely, but her sharp intake of breath told him she'd hurt something. "I'm okay," she insisted before he could ask. "You're not okay. You were buried alive 3 days ago. You should be in a hospital, not climbing a mountain." "Hospital means, police means whoever's hunting me shows up with a badge and a warrant. I told you, these people have reach. At some point, Rebecca, you're going to have to trust someone." "I trusted you," she said simply. "Isn't that enough?" The words hit harder than Daniel expected. Trust. Such a fragile thing, so easily broken, so rarely earned. He'd trusted that Sarah would recover, trusted that they'd grow old together, trusted that the universe operated on some basic principle of fairness. All of those trusts had proven misplaced. But Rebecca was looking at him with those dark, exhausted eyes, and he realized she'd given him something precious. The kind of trust that came from desperation, yes, but also from remembered kindness. From a door he'd built 15 years ago without knowing it would matter. "It's enough," Daniel said. "Come on, we're halfway there." The lie was closer to truth than he'd expected. Another 30 minutes of painful climbing brought them to the base of the fire tower, a skeletal structure of rusted metal rising 60 feet into the night sky. The stairs looked treacherous, many of them eaten through by decay, and the whole structure swayed slightly in the wind. "That doesn't look safe," Eli observed. "It's not," Daniel agreed, "which is why you're staying down here with Rebecca while I go up." "Dad, no way. What if it collapses?" "Then you and Rebecca get to safety and call for help." "With what phone? Mine barely works even in town." Daniel pulled out his own phone, saw that Eli was right, still no signal at ground level. "The top of the tower might be different. Higher elevation, clear line of sight. It's worth a try." "Then we should all go," Eli insisted. "Safety in numbers, right? Safety in not putting all 3 of us on a structure that might collapse." "This isn't a discussion, Eli." His son's jaw set in that stubborn way that reminded Daniel so much of Sarah it hurt. But Eli didn't argue further, just nodded once and stepped back. Small mercies. Daniel tested the first stair. It groaned but held. The second was worse, flexing under his weight. The third was missing entirely, forcing him to stretch his leg uncomfortably to reach the fourth. This was insane. He was climbing a death trap in the dark to make a phone call to an FBI agent who might not remember a case from 15 years ago, all while armed men hunted his son through the woods. Yet he kept climbing. The tower swayed with each step, metal creaking in protest. At 30 feet, Daniel made the mistake of looking down and saw Eli and Rebecca as small shapes in the darkness, saw how far he'd fall if the structure gave way. His hands tightened on the railing, itself more rust than metal, and he forced himself to keep moving. At 40 feet, his phone buzzed, 1 bar of signal, flickering in and out. At 50 feet, 2 bars, solid enough to maybe make a call. The top of the tower was a small platform, maybe 6 feet square, surrounded by a waist-high railing that Daniel didn't trust at all. The view would have been spectacular in daylight, miles of Oregon forest stretching in every direction, mountains in the distance, the lights of Timber Falls twinkling to the south. Right now, all Daniel could see was darkness punctuated by pinpricks of light that might have been houses or might have been the flashlights of the men hunting them. 3 bars. Definite signal. Daniel pulled up his phone's browser, typed FBI Sandra Martinez Trafficking Task Force into the search. The results loaded painfully slowly, but there. Agent Sandra Martinez, now a special agent in charge at the Portland field office. There was even a direct line listed on the FBI's public website. He checked the time, 9:47 p.m. Would she even be at the office this late? Would she answer a call from an unknown number? Would she believe a single word he said? Only one way to find out. Daniel dialed. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. He was preparing for voicemail when a woman's voice answered, crisp and professional despite the late hour. "Martinez. Agent Martinez, my name is Daniel Cole. You don't know me, but about 15 years ago you worked a human trafficking case in Portland and you..." "Sir, if this is regarding an active investigation, you'll need to call the main tip line during business hours." "It's regarding Rebecca Walsh." Silence on the other end, stretching so long Daniel thought the call had dropped. Then, "What did you say?" "Rebecca Walsh. She testified in your trafficking case. You set her up in a safe house, made sure she was protected. I was one of the contractors who worked on the building. I'm the carpenter, Martinez said, her voice changing completely. You built the security doors. I remember your file. What the hell is this about? Relief flooded through Daniel so intensely it made him dizzy. She remembered. After all these years, she actually remembered. I found Rebecca Walsh this morning. She'd been buried alive in a coffin in the woods near Timber Falls. The same people she testified against 15 years ago found her and tried to kill her. Another pause, shorter this time. Is she alive? Yes, but barely. And now the people who buried her are hunting us. They have my name, my address, and his voice cracked. They have pictures of my son. They're threatening to hurt him if I don't return Rebecca by midnight. Where are you right now? Fire lookout tower on Buckhorn Ridge. We're hiding in the woods. Agent Martinez, I don't know who to trust. Rebecca says these people have connections in law enforcement, that calling the local police could... Don't call anyone, Martinez cut him off. Don't go to the police, don't go to the sheriff, don't even call 911. I'm 2 hours from Timber Falls, but I can have a tactical team there in 90 minutes. Can you stay hidden that long? I don't know. They're actively searching for us. Then you need to get somewhere secure. Somewhere with multiple exits, somewhere defensible. Do you know the old lumber mill on the north side of town? Daniel did. A massive complex that had been Timber Falls' main employer until it shut down 5 years ago. He'd worked there briefly in his 20s, knew the layout reasonably well. The main building is locked down tight, but there's a supervisor's office in the northeast corner with a busted window. You can get in that way. The building has 4 exits, good sight lines, and enough places to hide if you need to. Get there, lock yourselves in that office, and wait for my team. How will I know they're your team and not... I'll text you a code word from this number. Don't open the door for anyone who doesn't give you that word. Understood? Understood. Daniel? Martinez's voice softened slightly. You did the right thing calling me. I've been looking for Rebecca Walsh for 6 months. We had intelligence that the trafficking ring had reorganized, that they were targeting their old victims. We tried to warn everyone we could, but Rebecca had gone completely off grid. I thought... She stopped. I thought they'd already gotten to her. They did get to her. They just didn't count on someone hearing her. Then she's lucky you're a light sleeper, or a morning hiker, or whatever circumstances led you to that coffin. Luck. Daniel almost laughed. He didn't believe in luck anymore, hadn't since Sarah's diagnosis. But maybe he was wrong. Maybe luck was exactly what this was. The impossible odds of the same man who'd built Rebecca's door 15 years ago being the one to hear her pounding from inside a coffin. Or maybe it was something else, something Sarah would have called fate, would have attributed to some grand design where everything happened for a reason. Daniel couldn't go that far. But looking down at his son's small figure 60 feet below, he had to admit that something had brought them to that exact spot in the woods at that exact moment. We'll be at the mill, Daniel said. How will I recognize your team? There'll be an FBI tactical gear, full identification. But if you have any doubt at all, you stay hidden and wait for me personally. I'll be there by midnight at the latest. Midnight, the same deadline the men had given for Rebecca's return. Daniel wondered if that was coincidence or if somehow these people knew exactly when federal response would arrive. It suggested a level of organization and intelligence that made his skin crawl. Agent Martinez, how bad is this? What are we really dealing with? The pause told him everything before she spoke. The ring we broke up 15 years ago was just one cell. We've since learned it was part of something much larger, a network that spans multiple states, possibly multiple countries. The people running it have significant resources, and yes, they have compromised some law enforcement assets. Not everyone, not even most, but enough that I'm very careful about who I read into operations. So Rebecca was right to be paranoid. Rebecca was right to be terrified. These people have killed witnesses before, have killed federal agents who got too close. The only reason they didn't just shoot her is because they wanted it to look like she'd run away. A body buried in the woods, eventually discovered by hikers, no obvious signs of murder. It would have looked like she'd hidden herself and died of exposure. Except we found her too soon. Except you found her too soon, Martinez agreed, which means they'll be desperate now. Sloppy. That works in our favor, but it also makes them more dangerous. Get to that mill, Daniel. Get there fast and lock yourselves in. And whatever you do, don't let them separate you from your son. The call ended, leaving Daniel alone on top of the swaying tower with the weight of everything that had just been said pressing down on him. He'd thought finding Rebecca in that coffin was the crisis. Turned out it was just the opening act. He climbed down carefully, testing each step even more cautiously now that he knew what was at stake. When he reached the bottom, Eli rushed over. "Did you reach her? What did she say?" "She's sending a team, but we need to move to a different location, the old lumber mill. She says we'll be safer there." "The mill's in town," Rebecca said. "That's where they grabbed me the first time, right off the street in broad daylight. You want to go closer to civilization?" "I want to go where we have walls and multiple exits and federal agents coming to back us up," Daniel corrected. "Unless you have a better idea?" Rebecca opened her mouth, then closed it. No, I don't." The hike down from Buckhorn Ridge was faster than the climb up had been, gravity working in their favor even as exhaustion worked against them. Daniel had to catch Rebecca twice when her legs simply stopped functioning, her body finally reaching the limits of what trauma and adrenaline could push it through. The second time, he simply picked her up and carried her, ignoring her weak protests. "Put me down. You can't carry me all the way to... Watch me." Eli led the way again, and Daniel found himself studying his son's back, the determined set of his shoulders, the careful way he navigated obstacles, the quick glances back to make sure they were still following. When had the boy become so capable? When had Daniel stopped noticing him growing up? Since Sarah died, probably. Since Daniel had been so consumed with his own grief that he'd missed his son learning to be strong. They reached the edge of the woods around 10:30, emerging onto a service road that ran behind the old industrial district. The lumber mill loomed ahead, a sprawling complex of buildings and equipment yards, everything dark and silent. It looked less like a refuge and more like a setting for exactly the kind of horror they were trying to escape. "This is a terrible idea," Rebecca muttered. "Noted. We're doing it anyway." Daniel set her down, keeping one arm around her waist for support. Together, the three of them approached the mill's perimeter fence, 10 feet of chain link topped with rusted barbed wire. There was a gate, but it was locked. Eli found the gap first, a section where someone had cut through the links and then bent them back to create a passage just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "After you," Daniel told his son. They crawled through one at a time, their clothes snagging on the sharp metal edges. Rebecca went last, needing Daniel's help from both sides, and by the time they were all through, his hands were bleeding from a dozen small cuts. The mill yard was a graveyard of machinery, massive log carriers, debarking equipment, saw assemblies that must have weighed tons. Everything was tagged with graffiti, evidence that local teenagers had discovered the place despite the fence. Daniel led them between the silent machines, keeping to the shadows, heading for the main building. Martinez had been right about the supervisor's office window. It was broken, the glass long since cleared away, leaving a gap just large enough to climb through. Daniel went first, dropping into what looked like a break room. Industrial fridge in one corner, ancient microwave on a counter, tables and chairs covered in a layer of dust that suggested nobody had been here in years. He helped Rebecca through, then Eli, and finally they were all inside. The building was vast, echoing with their footsteps as Daniel led them through corridors lined with abandoned offices. Employee photos still hung on some walls, faces of people who'd once made their livings here, now scattered to whatever jobs they'd found after the mill closed. The decay was everywhere, nature slowly reclaiming what industry had built. They found the Northeast office exactly where Martinez had said it would be. It was larger than Daniel expected, probably had belonged to someone important once, with windows facing two directions and a heavy wooden door that still had a functional lock. Someone had stripped it of furniture except for a battered desk and a filing cabinet, but it would serve its purpose. Daniel locked the door behind them, then checked the windows. Both could be opened, providing escape routes if needed. Good sightlines to the yard and the road beyond. Defensible, if it came to that. "Now we wait," he said, checking his phone. 10:47. A little over an hour until midnight. They settled onto the floor, backs against the wall, exhaustion finally catching up to all three of them. Nobody spoke for a long time. What was there to say? They were trapped in an abandoned mill, waiting for either federal agents or killers to arrive, with no guarantee they'd correctly identify which was which. It was Eli who broke the silence. Why did they do it? Do what, buddy? Take her the first time. Traffic people. Why did they do that? Daniel looked at Rebecca, unsure how to answer. She met his gaze, then turned to Eli with an expression that made her look older than she was. Money, she said simply. Some people see other people as products to be bought and sold. They don't care about the damage they cause, the lives they destroy. They just care about profit. But you got away. I got away, Rebecca agreed. And people like your dad helped make that possible. Not just by building doors, but by being the kind of people who take extra care, who show kindness to strangers, who teach their sons that protecting people is worth risking yourself. Eli processed this, his young face serious. Is that why they want to hurt us? Because Dad helped you? Yes. That's stupid. Despite everything, Rebecca smiled. You're absolutely right. It is stupid. Evil usually is. Mom used to say that, Eli said quietly. She said evil people were just broken in a way that made them hurt others. She said we should feel sorry for them, but still stop them. Daniel's throat tightened. He'd forgotten Sarah used to say that, forgotten a lot of her philosophies in the fog of grief. Hearing them come back through their son's voice was like having her in the room, her presence summoned by the child they'd made together. Your mom was a smart woman, Rebecca said. She died, Eli replied, matter of fact in the way children state painful truths. Car accident. Drunk driver hit her. I'm so sorry. Dad says she'd want us to keep being good people anyway, even though bad things happen. Your dad's right. Rebecca's eyes found Daniel's in the darkness. Being good isn't about whether the universe rewards you for it. It's about being able to look at yourself in the mirror. Before Daniel could respond, his phone buzzed, a text from Martinez's number. Sanctuary. That was it. One word, the code he was supposed to wait for. Daniel texted back, Received. We're in position. 3 dots appeared, indicating she was typing. Then, ETA 45 minutes. Stay quiet. Stay hidden. Do not respond to anyone without the code word. Daniel showed the phone to Rebecca and Eli. Help's coming. Or a trap, Rebecca said. Text message addresses are easy to spoof. You think someone intercepted? I think we should assume the worst and hope for the best. She wasn't wrong. Daniel moved to the window, peering out at the mill yard. Nothing moved except shadows cast by the half-moon breaking through clouds. No lights, no vehicles, no sign that anyone knew they were here. But they did know. The men hunting them weren't stupid. They'd tracked Rebecca for 6 months before catching her, had clearly been watching Daniel's cabin long enough to photograph Eli. They knew how to hunt, and eventually, hunters always found their prey. Daniel checked his phone again, 11:02 p.m., 58 minutes until midnight, 58 minutes until everything came to a head one way or another. He touched the revolver in his jacket pocket. 5 rounds, 5 chances to protect his son. 5 chances to not fail again the way he'd failed to protect Sarah from a drunk driver, to protect his family from tragedy, to keep the people he loved safe from a world that seemed determined to hurt them. Dad? Eli's voice was small in the darkness. Are we going to be okay? It was the question every parent dreads, the one that demands honesty but deserves comfort. Daniel thought about lying, about offering empty reassurances that everything would work out fine. Instead, he told his son the truth. I don't know, buddy, but I promise you this. Whatever happens, I'm not letting anyone hurt you. Not tonight, not ever. That's not a maybe, that's a guarantee. Eli nodded, seeming satisfied with that. And in the abandoned office, surrounded by the ghosts of dead industry and hunted by living monsters, Daniel Cole prepared to make good on a promise he had no idea how to keep. Outside, a car engine started somewhere in the distance. The hunters were closing in. The sound of that distant engine crystallized everything. No longer abstract threat, no longer theoretical danger. This was real, immediate, and getting closer with each passing second. Daniel moved away from the window, pulling Eli with him into the corner farthest from both exits. Rebecca had already positioned herself behind the filing cabinet, her breathing shallow and controlled despite the terror Daniel could see in her eyes. "How many exits did Martinez say this building had?" Rebecca whispered. 4. Daniel tried to visualize the layout from memory. Main entrance on the south side, loading dock to the west, emergency exit on the east wall, and the supervisor's window we came through. "So 4 ways in for them too?" "Yeah." The engine sound grew louder, then stopped abruptly. Daniel risked a glance through the window and saw headlights go dark in the parking area beyond the fence. Same dark SUV from his cabin, or one identical to it. The driver's door opened, but nobody got out, at least not that Daniel could see from this angle. "They're here," Eli breathed. "They're outside," Daniel corrected, though the distinction felt meaningless. Buried a woman alive. They'd know how to clear a building. Minutes crawled past, each one stretching into something that felt like hours. Daniel's phone showed 11:09. Martinez's team was still at least 35 minutes out, maybe more depending on traffic and how fast they were willing to push it. 35 minutes was an eternity when armed men were hunting you. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness outside, sweeping across the mill yard. Then another, and another. 3 beams, 3 searchers, just like Rebecca had said. They were spreading out, methodical, checking the perimeter before entry. Smart tactics, contained tactics, the kind of precision that came from military training or law enforcement experience. "They're professionals," Rebecca confirmed, reading Daniel's thoughts. "The 3 who took me, 2 of them had prison tattoos, gang affiliations. But they moved like soldiers. Someone trained them well. Who's running them?" "I never saw. They mentioned the boss a few times, talked about payment and instructions, but they never used a name. Whoever it is, they're careful, insulated, the kind of person who never gets their hands dirty." One of the flashlight beams paused at the gap in the fence, the same gap Daniel and his family had used to enter. The beam played over the cut metal, the bent links, evidence of recent passage. A voice carried across the distance, male and frustrated. "They're here. Has to be. Fresh blood on the fence." Daniel looked at his hands in the dim moonlight filtering through the window. Right. The cuts from squeezing through the gap. He'd been bleeding and hadn't even realized it, had probably left a trail a child could follow. "Spread out," the voice continued. "If they're in the main building, we flush them out. If they run, we take them in the yard. Either way, this ends tonight." The flashlight beams separated, each taking a different approach vector to the mill. Daniel's mind raced through scenarios, none of them good. They could hide and hope to outlast the search, but that only worked if the searchers gave up. They could try to slip out through one of the other exits, but that meant moving through unknown territory in the dark, with Rebecca barely able to walk. They could barricade themselves in this office and hope Martinez's team arrived before the door came down. Or they could fight. Daniel's hand found the revolver again, felt its weight, its terrible promise of violence. 5 rounds, 3 men. The math was deceptively simple until you factored in accuracy, surprise, the chaos of actual gunfire. Daniel had fired exactly 1 gun in his entire life. This revolver, at a range, when Sarah had insisted they both learn how to handle it properly. He'd hit the target maybe 60% of the time under controlled conditions. Here, in the dark, with his son's life on the line, his hands shaking from adrenaline, those odds dropped to almost nothing. "What if we call out to them?" Eli suggested suddenly. "Tell them we called the FBI, that agents are coming. Maybe they'll run. Or maybe they'll realize they need to silence us before those agents arrive," Rebecca said gently. "I'm sorry, Eli. I know that's harsh, but these people don't scare easily." "Then what do we do?" It was the question they were all thinking, the one that had no good answer. Daniel looked at his son, his brave, clever, too young for this son, and felt the weight of every decision that had led them here. Finding Rebecca had seemed like the obviously right thing to do. Helping her had seemed natural, instinctive, the kind of choice a good person made without hesitation. But good choices could have terrible consequences. And right now, that terrible consequence might be Eli paying the price for his father's morality. Glass shattered somewhere in the building, one of the ground floor windows being breached. The sound echoed through empty hallways, through 20 years of abandonment, a violent intrusion into artificial silence. Then another crash, closer this time. They were coming in through multiple entry points simultaneously, boxing in their prey. "Under the desk," Daniel whispered urgently to Eli. "Crawl under and don't make a sound. No matter what happens, you stay hidden until I tell you otherwise or until you hear me say your mother's name. You understand?" Eli's eyes went wide. "Dad, no. I'm not hiding while you—" "Sarah," Daniel cut him off. "That's the code word. If you hear me say Sarah, you run. You go out that window and you run, and you don't stop running until you find a police station or a hospital or someone who can help. Promise me." "Dad, please. Promise me, Eli." His son's face crumpled, tears threatening, but he nodded. "I promise." "Good man." Daniel helped him crawl into the desk's leg space, then pushed the desk chair in front of it for extra concealment. "Rebecca, get behind the filing cabinet. If they come through that door, I need them focused on me, not looking around the room." "Daniel, you can't possibly think— I think I'm the only one with a weapon, and the only one who's not injured or 11 years old. So yes, if it comes to shooting, I'm the one who does it." Rebecca started to argue, then stopped. Instead, she reached out and squeezed his hand once, briefly. "The man who built my door," she said quietly. "I knew he was good. I didn't know he was this good. Ask me again if we survive." He positioned himself beside the door, revolver drawn, trying to remember everything Sarah had taught him about firing. Proper stance, both hands on the grip, breathe out when you squeeze the trigger, aim for center mass. All of it felt academic now, instructions for a reality that had nothing to do with this moment. Footsteps in the hallway outside, approaching with the confidence of people who believed they had control of the situation. The steps paused outside the door. A hand tested the knob, locked as Daniel had left it. "Office is secured," a voice said, probably into a radio. "Want me to breach?" A response too quiet for Daniel to hear. "Copy that." Moving to the next, the door exploded inward. Not a kick, not a shoulder charge, but actual explosive force that tore the lock mechanism right out of the frame. The door swung wide, smoke and splinters filling the air, and a man stepped through wearing tactical gear and holding a pistol that looked military grade. Daniel fired. The revolver's report was deafening in the enclosed space, the muzzle flash painting the room in stark white light for a fraction of a second. The bullet caught the man in the shoulder. Not center mass, not the kill shot Daniel had aimed for, but enough to spin him sideways and send his own weapon clattering to the floor. "Contact!" the man screamed into his radio. "Contact Northeast office. Suspect is armed." Daniel fired again, missed completely, the bullet punching through drywall somewhere behind the falling man. 3 rounds left. His ears were ringing, his hands shaking badly now, and there were still 2 more men somewhere in this building who now knew exactly where he was. The wounded man was crawling backward, trying to reach the hallway, leaving a blood trail on the dusty floor. Daniel stepped forward, kicked the man's dropped pistol away, then pressed his revolver against the man's head. "How many?" Daniel demanded. "How many people are in this building?" "3 of us," the man gasped. "Just 3. Plus you're already dead, you just don't know it yet." "Who sent you? Who's running this operation?" The man's laugh was more cough than humor. "You think I'm telling you anything? I'm not the one about to watch his kid die." Something dark and primal rose in Daniel then, something he'd never felt before. The absolute willingness to hurt another human being, to cause real damage if it meant protecting his son. His finger tightened on the trigger, pressure building toward that final ounce that would end this man's life. "Dad, don't!" Eli's voice, small and terrified from under the desk. "Please, don't!" The moment broke. Daniel pulled back, the revolver shaking in his hands. He wasn't a killer, couldn't be, wouldn't be, even now, even when every instinct screamed at him to eliminate the threat. He stepped back toward the desk, keeping the revolver trained on the wounded man. "Rebecca, check his pockets. Radio, phone, anything he's carrying." She emerged from behind the filing cabinet, moving stiffly but with purpose. The wounded man tried to resist, but between the shoulder wound and Rebecca's determination, he was quickly relieved of a radio, a cell phone, and a wicked-looking tactical knife. "Got it," Rebecca said, then paused, staring at the cell phone screen. "Daniel, look at this." He risked a glance. The phone showed a text message thread, the most recent entry time stamped just minutes ago. Target located Northeast office. Breach and secure. Priority 1 alive if possible, acceptable losses if necessary. Boss wants to handle disposal personally. Boss wants them alive, Rebecca read. That gives us leverage. Leverage for what? They're still going to... Gunfire ripped through the window, bullets punching through glass and drywall, forcing everyone to the floor. Someone was shooting from the mill yard, laying down suppressing fire while their companion was down. Smart tactics again, coordinated response, the kind of thing that came from actual training. Office, report, a voice shouted from somewhere in the building. Are you secure? The wounded man on the floor stayed silent, probably hoping his partners would assume he was dead or incapacitated. Daniel grabbed the radio from Rebecca and made a decision that was either brilliant or suicidal. Secure, he said into the radio, trying to deepen his voice, hoping the static would disguise any difference. Target down. We're clear. A long pause. Then, copy. Bringing the vehicle around. We'll load them and move to secondary location per boss's instructions. Daniel looked at Rebecca, saw the same desperate hope in her eyes that he felt. They'd bought time, maybe minutes, maybe less. But time was all they needed. Martinez's team had to be close now. He checked his phone, 11:24. The screen also showed 2 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize and a new text from Martinez. ETA 15 minutes. Stay put. Heavy resistance expected. 15 minutes. They just had to survive 15 more minutes. More footsteps in the hallway, these ones running. The second man appeared in the doorway, weapon raised, and immediately processed the scene. His partner bleeding on the floor, Daniel with a gun, the obvious truth that the radio report had been a lie. Daniel didn't give him time to react. He fired his 3rd round, then his 4th in rapid succession. The first shot went wide again. He was a carpenter, not a marksman, and his accuracy dissolved under pressure. But the second shot caught the man in the leg, dropping him before he could return fire. Stay down, Daniel shouted, advancing on the second man. Drop the weapon or the next one goes through your head. The man hesitated, clearly evaluating whether Daniel had the stones to make good on the threat. Whatever he saw in Daniel's face must have convinced him, because the pistol clattered to the floor. Kick it away, now! The man complied, his face twisted in pain and rage. You're making this so much worse for yourself, for your family. The boss doesn't like complications. Who's the boss? Someone with enough money and power to disappear you and everyone you've ever met. You think the FBI can protect you? They couldn't protect her. He jerked his chin at Rebecca. 6 months we looked for her. 6 months she thought she was safe. Then we found her anyway, and we'll find you too. Maybe, Daniel said, but not tonight. He moved back to his defensive position, now holding his revolver, 1 round left, and covering 2 disabled opponents. The math had shifted in his favor, but there was still a 3rd man somewhere in the building, and presumably that man had heard the gunfire and knew things had gone wrong. The question was whether he'd press the attack or cut his losses and run. Daniel got his answer when smoke began seeping under the door. No, Rebecca breathed. No, they're not. The smell hit a moment later. Not wood smoke, but something chemical and acrid. The 3rd man wasn't pressing the attack. He was burning them out. Eli, out, now! Daniel shouted, all attempts at concealment abandoned. His son scrambled from under the desk, coughing already as smoke filled the room. Rebecca grabbed the tactical knife from where she'd set it down and moved toward the window. But the gunfire from outside started again, pinning them away from that exit. They were trapped. The wounded men on the floor were crawling toward the hallway, trying to escape the smoke, but Daniel couldn't let them go. Couldn't risk them attacking from behind or alerting their partner to the escape route. He used the desk chair to block their path, then kicked their weapons further out of reach. The other window! Rebecca shouted over the crackling that was rapidly becoming a roar. The fire was spreading fast, too fast, feeding on 20 years of accumulated dust and dry wood. The one facing the loading dock! Daniel hadn't even registered there was a second window, had been so focused on the main view that he'd missed the smaller window high on the eastern wall. Rebecca was already dragging a filing cabinet under it, preparing to climb. Eli first, Daniel said, helping his son onto the cabinet. The window was stuck, painted shut probably, but Daniel used the butt of his revolver to break the glass. Cold air rushed in, feeding the fire behind them, making the smoke swirl in violent patterns. "Go," he urged Eli. "Crawl through and drop down. We'll be right behind you." Eli hesitated for only a second, then squeezed through the window frame and disappeared. Daniel heard the thud of his son hitting the ground outside, then Eli's voice. "I'm okay. Rebecca, you're next." "I can't climb that. My ankle." "You don't have a choice. The alternative is burning to death." He practically lifted her onto the cabinet, pushed her toward the window. She struggled through, her injured body protesting every movement, but fear provided strength that her muscles couldn't. She dropped outside with a cry of pain that suggested her landing wasn't as clean as Eli's had been. Daniel was about to follow when movement in the hallway caught his eye. The third man had appeared, backlit by flames, holding a shotgun. For a frozen moment, they stared at each other, hunter and prey, predator and father, two men who'd never met before tonight, and would both do anything to survive this moment. The man raised the shotgun. Daniel dove through the window. The shotgun blast tore through the space where he'd been a second earlier, pellets shredding drywall and wood, the sound enormous even over the fire's roar. Daniel hit the ground outside hard, felt something in his shoulder crunch, but there was no time to assess damage. He rolled, trying to get his feet under him, trying to find Rebecca and Eli in the darkness. "Here!" Rebecca's voice, off to his right. She dragged Eli behind a pile of pallets, minimal cover, but better than nothing. Daniel scrambled toward them, his shoulder screaming protest, still clutching the revolver with its single remaining round. The loading dock they'd escaped onto overlooked the western side of the mill complex, an area strewn with debris and rusted equipment. The fire inside the building was visible now through multiple windows, orange light dancing across everything, turning the mill into something from a nightmare. Smoke poured from the broken windows, carrying embers that threatened to ignite the whole structure. "They're trying to kill us with fire," Eli said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Like burning ants." "Not exactly the metaphor I'd choose, buddy, but yes." "Where's the third man?" Rebecca asked. "The one with the shotgun?" As if in answer, the loading dock door rolled up with a metallic shriek, revealing the burning interior. The third man stepped through the smoke like a demon emerging from hell, shotgun raised, his face covered with a bandana against the fumes. Daniel raised his revolver, but the man was faster. The shotgun roared, pellets chewing up the pallet Daniel was hiding behind. Splinters exploded into the air, a few of them catching Daniel's face and hands. One round left, one chance. Miss, and they were dead. Daniel tried to steady his breathing, tried to remember Sarah's instructions about accuracy under pressure. Center mass, breathe out, squeeze, don't pull. The man advanced, pumping the shotgun, preparing another shot. Daniel stood, exposing himself completely, and fired his last round. The bullet hit the man in the chest, dead center, exactly where Daniel had aimed. The man staggered backward, the shotgun dropping from his hands, surprise evident even behind the bandana. He took one more step, then fell sideways off the loading dock, hitting the pavement below with a sickening crack. Daniel's hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped the now empty revolver. He'd just shot two men, maybe killed one, definitely killed any illusion he had about who he could become when his family was threatened. The carpenter who took extra care with doors had become someone who could pull a trigger without hesitation when necessary. "Is he dead?" Eli asked. "I don't know." Daniel didn't have the strength to check, didn't have the courage to look at what he'd done. "We need to move. The other two are still..." Sirens. Multiple sirens, approaching fast from what sounded like several directions. The beautiful, impossible sound of law enforcement response, of help arriving, of surviving long enough to be saved. "Martinez," Rebecca breathed. "She made it." Vehicle lights flooded the mill complex. Not just one or two, but at least a dozen, coming through the front gate, around the perimeter, blocking every exit. Tactical lights mounted on SUVs and vans illuminated the entire area like a football stadium. And over a loudspeaker, a woman's voice that could only be Agent Sandra Martinez. "FBI, everyone on the ground, hands where we can see them." Daniel set down his empty revolver carefully, then raised his hands. Rebecca and Eli did the same. For a terrifying moment, they were just targets in the light, vulnerable and exposed, praying that Martinez's team could tell the difference between victims and perpetrators. Then tactical teams swarmed the loading dock, Agents in full gear shouting commands, securing the area. Someone grabbed Daniel, forced him face down on the concrete, zip-tied his hands behind his back. He didn't resist, didn't try to explain, just let it happen because resisting armed federal agents was a good way to get shot, even when you were innocent. "Clear!" someone shouted. "3 civilians secured. Loading dock area." "Civilian one is wounded," another voice, closer. "We need medical." Daniel couldn't tell who they meant, himself, Rebecca, or Eli. His shoulder hurt badly, his face stung from shotgun pellet splinters, and his ears were still ringing from the revolver's reports. But he was alive. They were all alive. That was what mattered. "Daniel Cole?" A woman's voice, calm and professional. "I'm Special Agent Martinez. You can relax. You're safe now." He tried to look up, couldn't quite manage it from his position on the ground. "My son is being checked by paramedics. He's scared but unhurt. Rebecca Walsh is here too, also receiving medical attention." "You did good, Mr. Cole. You kept them alive until we arrived." "The men inside, we've got them. 2 wounded, 1 deceased. The fire department is handling the blaze. Right now I need you to stay calm and let my people do their jobs. Can you do that?" Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice. The adrenaline was fading now, replaced by exhaustion so profound it felt like drowning. His body had been running on panic and desperation for hours, and now that the immediate threat was over, everything was shutting down at once. They cut the zip ties and helped him to a sitting position. A paramedic appeared, shining a light in his eyes, checking his pupils, asking him questions he barely registered. How was he feeling? Did he know where he was? What day was it? Monday night? Or was it Tuesday now? He'd lost track of time somewhere between finding the coffin and burning down a lumber mill. "Dad!" Eli's voice cut through the fog. Daniel turned to see his son running toward him, a silver blanket wrapped around his shoulders, his face smudged with smoke and tears. "Dad, are you okay?" "I'm okay, buddy." Daniel grabbed Eli in a hug that probably hurt his shoulder, but he didn't care. His son was alive, was safe, was here. Nothing else mattered. "I'm so okay." "You shot that guy." "I know." "He was going to kill us." "I know that too." Eli pulled back, looking at his father with eyes that seemed older than they'd been this morning. "Does that make you a bad person? Killing someone?" It was the question Daniel had been avoiding asking himself, the moral equation he didn't know how to solve. He'd taken a life. Probably more than one, depending on how badly he'd wounded the first 2 men. That weight would stay with him forever, would color every moment going forward. But looking at his son's face, knowing that Eli was alive because of what Daniel had done, the answer became clear. "It makes me your father," Daniel said finally. "And a father protects his child. Always. Even if it costs everything?" Especially then. Martinez appeared beside them, flanked by 2 agents. Up close, she was younger than Daniel had expected. Maybe mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that missed nothing. She looked at Daniel with an expression he couldn't quite read. "We need to debrief you," she said, "all 3 of you. But the short version first. How did you end up in a shootout in a burning lumber mill?" "Your timing was excellent, by the way," Daniel said instead of answering. "Another few minutes and we'd have been out of options. We pushed speed limits that are probably going to result in paperwork. Worth it, though." She gestured to where paramedics were loading Rebecca into an ambulance. "She's the one I've been looking for, the witness who disappeared. When you called, I knew we had to move fast." The men who took her, they said they work for someone called the Boss, someone with resources and connections. Rebecca thinks there are compromised people in law enforcement. Martinez's expression hardened. She's probably right. This trafficking ring has tendrils everywhere. It's why I brought my own team, people I trust absolutely. We're not involving local police until we know exactly who can be trusted. So what happens now? Now we secure the scene, collect evidence, interview witnesses. The 3 men we captured will face federal charges: kidnapping, attempted murder, arson, trafficking-related crimes. They'll spend the rest of their lives in prison if I have anything to say about it. And Rebecca? Goes into protective custody. Proper protective custody this time, not the half measures we managed 15 years ago. I'm not losing another witness to these people. They'll come after her again, Daniel said. They don't give up. She told me that. Then we'll be ready. And with her testimony plus whatever we can get from the 3 we captured tonight, maybe we can finally take down the organization running this operation. Cut off the head, burn out the rot. Martinez paused. You and your son will need protection too, at least until we're sure there's no blowback coming your way. The thought sent ice through Daniel's veins. He'd been so focused on surviving the immediate threat that he hadn't considered the long-term consequences. These people knew his name, his address, his son's face. They'd threatened Eli once and failed, but that didn't mean they'd stop trying. For how long? He asked. I don't know. Weeks, maybe months. Depends on how the investigation unfolds. She must have seen something in his face because her expression softened slightly. I know it's not ideal, but it's better than the alternative. Which is? Spending the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering when they'll strike. This way, we end it properly. We put them away and make sure they can't hurt anyone ever again. Daniel looked at Eli, saw his son watching the paramedics work on Rebecca, saw the way the boy's shoulders were hunched with exhaustion. They'd survived tonight, but at what cost? How many more nights like this would it take before they were truly safe? Okay, Daniel said. We'll do whatever you need. Good man. Martinez stood, preparing to return to coordinating the scene. One of my agents will take you to a safe house. Get cleaned up, get some rest. We'll start the formal debriefing tomorrow. She walked away, leaving Daniel and Eli sitting on the loading dock, wrapped in emergency blankets, watching federal agents swarm over a burning lumber mill like ants on a carcass. The fire department had arrived and was battling the blaze, their hoses sending arcs of water into the inferno. It would take hours to put out completely, and by then the building would be a total loss. We destroyed a lumber mill, Eli said, something like awe in his voice. We survived, Daniel corrected. That's all that matters. Mom would have been proud. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow, unexpected and overwhelming. Would Sarah have been proud, or would she have been horrified that he'd exposed their son to such danger, that he'd chosen to help a stranger instead of keeping Eli safe and distant from any threat? But then he remembered what Rebecca had said earlier about how Sarah believed evil people were just broken, that you should stop them while still feeling compassion. Sarah would have helped Rebecca too, would have opened their home, would have called Martinez, would have done exactly what Daniel had done because it was the right thing to do. Yeah, Daniel said softly. I think she would have been. They sat in silence after that, watching the organized chaos of federal agents processing a crime scene. Eventually, someone came to collect them. A young agent who introduced herself as Miller and explained she'd be driving them to a safe house in Portland. The ride was quiet, both Daniel and Eli too exhausted for conversation, their minds still processing everything that had happened in the past 16 hours. The safe house turned out to be a nondescript apartment in a residential neighborhood, the kind of place nobody would look twice at. Agent Miller showed them inside, explained that the fridge was stocked and there were clean clothes in the bedrooms, then positioned herself outside the door like a sentinel. Daniel helped Eli shower first, washing smoke and fear from his son's hair, checking for injuries he might have missed in the chaos. Then his own shower, standing under water almost hot enough to burn, watching the mixture of blood and soot and smoke circle the drain. When he finally emerged, he found Eli asleep on the couch, still wrapped in a borrowed bathrobe that was several sizes too large. Daniel covered him with a blanket, then sank into the armchair opposite, his body finally giving up the fight against exhaustion. His shoulder throbbed where he'd landed wrong coming through the window. His hands bore a dozen small cuts from the fence and the flying splinters. His face stung where shotgun pellets had grazed him. But they were alive. Against all odds, against every reasonable expectation, they'd survived a night that should have killed them. His phone buzzed. He'd somehow managed to keep it through everything. A text from an unknown number. This is Rebecca. Martinez gave me your number. Thank you for saving my life. Again. Daniel stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Thank you for trusting me. Get some rest. We'll figure out tomorrow when tomorrow comes. Her response came almost immediately. Your wife raised a good man, and you're raising a good son. The world needs more people like your family. Daniel set the phone aside, looking at Eli sleeping peacefully on the couch, and felt something shift in his chest. For 2 years he'd been living in the shadow of Sarah's death, going through motions, surviving, but not really living. Tonight had been terrible in ways he'd never be able to fully articulate, but it had also reminded him of something crucial. He was still here, still capable, still a father worth having. Sarah would never see Eli grow up, would never watch him play competitive soccer or go to his first dance or graduate high school. But Daniel would, and he'd make sure their son grew up to be the kind of man who helped people, who built strong doors for strangers, who stood between evil and innocence even when it cost everything. Outside, dawn was beginning to break over Portland, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. A new day, bought with blood and fire and desperation. Daniel closed his eyes, let exhaustion finally claim him, and dreamed of doors that could never be broken and coffins that stayed empty forever. Daniel woke to the smell of coffee and the disorienting sensation of being in a place he didn't recognize. For a few heartbeats, he was lost, his mind still caught between the burning lumber mill and some half-remembered dream about Sarah standing in a doorway he couldn't quite reach. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back with the force of cold water, and he sat up too quickly, his injured shoulder protesting with a sharp spike of pain. "Easy, Dad," Eli's voice came from the kitchen area. "Agent Miller said you should take it slow. You've got bruised ribs and a separated shoulder." Daniel looked down at himself, discovered he was wearing clothes he didn't remember putting on, sweatpants and a t-shirt that were both slightly too large. Someone must have helped him change after he'd passed out. The thought of being that vulnerable, that unaware, sent a chill through him despite the apartment's warmth. "What time is it?" His voice came out rough, smoke-damaged. "Almost 11. Morning. You slept like 13 hours. 13 hours. Daniel tried to process that, tried to reconcile it with the urgency that had driven every moment of yesterday. But his body apparently had other ideas about what constituted priority, and unconsciousness had won out over vigilance. He stood carefully, testing his balance, and made his way to the kitchen. Agent Miller sat at the small dining table, laptop open in front of her, a radio earpiece visible in her left ear. She looked up as Daniel entered and gave him a professional nod. "Mr. Cole, how are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck." "How's Rebecca?" "Miss Walsh is stable. She's at a secure medical facility, being treated for dehydration, infections, and various trauma-related injuries. Agent Martinez says she's cooperating fully with the investigation." "And the men from last night?" Miller's expression went carefully neutral. "2 are in federal custody, recovering from their wounds under guard. The third, the one you shot on the loading dock, died en route to the hospital. Massive internal bleeding from the chest wound." The words hit Daniel with unexpected force. He'd killed someone, not wounded, not injured, but actually ended a human life. He'd known it was likely, had seen the man fall, but having it confirmed was different, final, irreversible. "Dad?" Eli was watching him with concern. "You okay?" "Yeah, buddy, just processing." Daniel accepted the coffee cup his son handed him, grateful for something to do with his hands. "So what happens now?" "Agent Martinez wants to debrief you both this afternoon," Miller said. "She's coordinating with the district attorney's office on charges against the 2 surviving suspects. Their cooperation will determine how this plays out." "Are they talking?" "One of them is. The other is lawyered up. But the one who's talking, the first man you shot, with the shoulder wound, he's giving up names, locations, operational details. Apparently facing life in prison makes people reconsider their loyalty." Daniel sipped his coffee, trying to feel something about that information. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction that the investigation was progressing. Instead, he just felt hollow, like something fundamental had been scooped out of him during the night and not replaced. "There's something else you should know," Miller continued. "The local media has picked up the story. Fire at the old lumber mill, FBI involvement, shots fired. They don't have names yet, but they're speculating about organized crime, drug operations, all sorts of theories. But they don't know about the trafficking angle. We're keeping that compartmentalized for now. The fewer details that leak, the better for the investigation." She paused, seeming to choose her next words carefully. "But Mr. Cole, you should prepare yourself. Your involvement will eventually become public knowledge. Self-defense shooting, even a justified one, tends to attract attention. The thought of reporters, of cameras, of having to explain over and over why he'd killed a man made Daniel's stomach turn. He just wanted to help Rebecca, to do the right thing. He hadn't signed up for becoming a public figure or a cautionary tale or whatever the media would make him into. "Can we go home?" Eli asked quietly. "After the debrief, I mean. Can we go back to the cabin?" Miller and Daniel exchanged a glance. "The cabin isn't safe right now," Daniel said gently. "The people who came after us know where we live. Until Agent Martinez is sure we're not in danger, we need to stay somewhere they can't find us." "So we're in hiding. We're in protection. There's a difference." "Is there?" Eli's voice carried an edge Daniel hadn't heard before, something brittle and angry lurking beneath the question. "Because it feels like we're prisoners, like we did something wrong. We didn't do anything wrong. Then why does it feel like we're being punished?" Daniel didn't have a good answer for that. His son was right. They were the victims here, had risked everything to save someone who needed help, and now they were the ones confined to a safe house, separated from their home and their normal lives. There was an injustice to it that Daniel couldn't quite articulate but felt deeply. Agent Miller cleared her throat. "For what it's worth, Eli, you and your father are heroes. What you did yesterday saved Rebecca Walsh's life and potentially prevented dozens of other people from being trafficked. The FBI doesn't throw that word around lightly, but it applies here." "Heroes don't usually have to hide," Eli muttered, but some of the anger had drained from his voice. "No," Miller agreed, "but they also don't usually have to face the kind of enemies you're dealing with. This organization is sophisticated, well-funded, and extremely dangerous. We're not keeping you here to punish you. We're keeping you here because we don't want to find you buried in the woods like we almost found Rebecca." The blunt words hung in the air, impossible to argue with. Eli subsided into silence, and Daniel squeezed his son's shoulder in what he hoped was a comforting gesture. They spent the rest of the morning in a strange limbo, not quite free, but not quite imprisoned, waiting for Martinez to arrive and begin the formal debriefing process. Daniel tried to distract himself with television, but every news channel seemed to be running stories about the lumber mill fire, and he couldn't stomach watching speculation about events he'd lived through. Eli retreated to one of the bedrooms with a book, and Daniel was left alone with his thoughts, which was possibly the worst company he could have kept. His phone rang around 1 in the afternoon. Unknown number, but Daniel answered anyway, half expecting it to be Martinez. "Mr. Cole?" A man's voice, smooth and cultured, with an accent Daniel couldn't quite place. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Every instinct Daniel had screamed danger. "Who is this?" "A concerned party. Someone with a vested interest in recent events. I wanted to extend my congratulations on your survival last night. Quite impressive for a carpenter." Daniel's blood ran cold. He glanced at Agent Miller, who was suddenly alert, her hand moving toward her weapon. "How did you get this number?" "Please, Mr. Cole, I have resources you can't imagine. Your phone number is the least of what I know about you. Your social security number, your late wife's medical records, your son's school transcripts, the balance in your checking account. Should I continue?" "What do you want?" "Straight to business. I appreciate that." The man's voice carried a smile Daniel couldn't see but could definitely hear. "Here's the situation. You've caused me significant inconvenience. 3 of my employees are now in federal custody, one of them dead by your hand. A lucrative operation has been disrupted. And worst of all, you've given the FBI access to a witness I spent considerable resources tracking down and eliminating. Rebecca's alive, and she's going to testify against you and everyone you work with." "Is she?" "We'll see about that. Federal witnesses have a way of developing cold feet. Accidents happen. Memories fail. I'm very patient, Mr. Cole, and I have a very long reach." Daniel's hand tightened on the phone. "If you're calling to threaten me, I'm calling to offer you a choice. Here's how this works. You convince Ms. Walsh to recant her testimony. You tell the FBI that you were mistaken about the events of last night, that perhaps you overreacted to what was actually a misunderstanding. You make this problem go away, and I'll make your problems go away. You and your son can return to your normal lives. No more safe houses. No more looking over your shoulder. No more danger. And if I refuse, then I'll demonstrate exactly how little protection the FBI can actually provide. Do you know how many people work at your son's school? How many of them have access to the building after hours? How many routes there are into that cabin you call home? I could give you numbers, Mr. Cole, but I think you're intelligent enough to understand the implications. Agent Miller was on her feet now, speaking urgently into her radio. Daniel's mind raced, trying to figure out how to keep this man talking, how to give the FBI time to trace the call, or gather intelligence, or do whatever it was they did in situations like this. "You're bluffing," Daniel said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "If you had the capability to hurt us, you would have done it already." Would I? Or am I simply demonstrating my reach, making sure you understand that hiding behind federal agents won't save you forever? Consider this a professional courtesy, Mr. Cole. I'm giving you a way out, a way to protect your son and avoid becoming another tragic story about civilians who got involved in matters beyond their understanding. I'm not helping you cover up human trafficking. Human trafficking. The man sighed as if disappointed. Such an ugly phrase for a simple business transaction. I provide a service. People who want to work in America, who want better lives, who are willing to pay for transportation and employment opportunities. Is it my fault if sometimes the circumstances aren't exactly what they expected? You buried Rebecca alive. I did no such thing. My employees, acting on their own initiative and against my explicit instructions, may have overstepped. That's why 2 of them are now in federal custody. Consequences of their poor judgment. Consequences of their... But I'm a businessman, Mr. Cole, not a monster, and businesses can be negotiated with. Then negotiate with the FBI, turn yourself in, cooperate with the investigation. Now where's the incentive in that? No, I think my offer is more than generous. You have 72 hours to convince Ms. Walsh and the authorities that this entire situation has been blown out of proportion. After that, well, I hope your son is a light sleeper. And I do hope he's been practicing his soccer. Athletic children are so much more resilient to trauma, don't you think? The call ended, leaving Daniel staring at his phone with a mixture of rage and terror. Agent Miller was already on her radio, relaying information, requesting traces and protective detail enhancements, and whatever other measures the FBI deployed when witnesses received direct threats. "Did you get it?" Daniel asked. "The trace?" The call came from a burner phone, bounced through multiple towers. "We'll analyze it, but I wouldn't hold my breath for useful intel." Miller's expression was grim. "Mr. Cole, we need to move you immediately. If they have your phone number, they may have more than that." "They do have more. He basically told me so." "Then we operate under the assumption that your location is compromised and execute emergency relocation protocols. Pack only what you absolutely need. We're leaving in 5 minutes." The next several hours became a blur of secure vehicles, route changes, and eventually arriving at a different safe house. This one, a rural farmhouse about an hour outside Portland, surrounded by open fields that would make any approach visible from miles away. FBI agents seemed to be everywhere, both visible and presumably not, creating layers of security that felt simultaneously reassuring and terrifying. Martinez arrived as the sun was setting, her expression tight with controlled anger. She found Daniel on the farmhouse porch, watching Eli throw a tennis ball against the barn wall with methodical repetition, each throw carrying the weight of frustration the boy couldn't otherwise express. "We analyzed the call," Martinez said without preamble. "Professional-grade equipment, sophisticated routing, no usable metadata. Whoever made that call has access to serious technical resources. He knew everything about us. Bank accounts, medical records, everything. That's what concerns me most. This suggests either a significant intelligence operation or insider access to databases that should be secure. We're running internal audits, checking for breaches, but that takes time. Time we might not have. He gave me 72 hours to make this go away." Martinez leaned against the porch railing, looking out at the darkening fields. "You understand that's not possible, right? Even if you wanted to comply, which I know you don't. Rebecca's testimony is already documented. We have statements from 3 suspects. Physical evidence from the coffin, from the mill, from your cabin. This investigation is moving forward regardless of what you or Rebecca say now. So the threat is just leverage, intimidation. Or it's a prelude to action. These people don't make empty threats, Daniel. If they say they're coming after you and your son, I have to take that seriously." "Then what do we do?" "We accelerate the timeline. Rebecca testifies to a grand jury next week instead of next month. We prosecute the two suspects we have in custody immediately, squeeze them for more information, and we keep you and Eli in protective custody until we've dismantled enough of this organization that retaliation becomes prohibitively risky. How long will that take? Honestly, I don't know. Could be weeks, could be months. These investigations are complex, and this particular organization has proven extremely resilient. Daniel watched Eli throw the ball again, saw the way his son's shoulders were hunched with tension. He's 11 years old. He should be worried about homework and soccer practice, not whether someone's going to hurt him because his father tried to help someone. You did help someone. You saved Rebecca Walsh's life. That counts for something. Does it? Because right now it feels like I've destroyed my son's childhood and painted a target on both our backs. Martinez was quiet for a moment, then turned to face him fully. 15 years ago, I was a junior agent working my first major case. The trafficking ring we busted was one of the ugliest things I'd ever encountered. Women and girls being moved across state lines, promised jobs, and given slavery. We arrested about 40 people, but we knew there were more. Higher-ups who were insulated, protected, unreachable. And I made it my mission to keep tracking them. I transferred to the task force, spent years building cases, protecting witnesses, trying to chip away at this network. But they're like Hydra. Cut off one head, two more grow back. So when I got your call last night, when I realized Rebecca Walsh was alive after 6 months of thinking she was dead, it felt like maybe, finally, we could strike a real blow against these people. You're saying my involvement matters to your investigation. I'm saying your involvement might be what finally brings these people down. Rebecca's testimony, combined with what we're getting from the two in custody, is painting a picture of an organization that's bigger and more sophisticated than we'd realized. We have names now. Bank accounts, safe houses, transportation routes. This is the kind of intelligence breakthrough that can dismantle an entire operation. And all it cost was my sense of safety and my son's innocence. I know that's not fair. I know you didn't ask for any of this. But sometimes the world demands things from us that we never wanted to give. Martinez glanced at Eli, who was still throwing the ball with mechanical precision. He's strong, both of you are. You'll get through this. You can't know that. No, Martinez admitted, but I can promise you that the FBI is going to do everything in our power to protect you both, and to make sure the people threatening you face justice. That has to count for something. Before Daniel could respond, one of the agents posted near the property perimeter came running toward the house, his radio crackling with urgent chatter. Martinez immediately went tense, her hand moving to her sidearm. "Agent Martinez," the man called as he approached. "We've got movement on the access road. Vehicle approaching without authorization." "How many?" "Single sedan, 2 occupants visible." Martinez was already moving toward the house, gesturing for Daniel to follow. "Get inside, lock the doors. Don't come out until I give the all clear." "What about Eli?" "I'll get him. Go." Daniel watched Martinez jog toward his son while he stumbled into the farmhouse, his heart hammering. Through the window, he could see agents taking up defensive positions, their weapons drawn, creating a perimeter around the property. Whatever was coming down that access road, the FBI was prepared to meet it with force. The sedan came into view, a dark blue Honda, moving slowly, almost cautiously. It stopped about 50 yards from the house, engine idling. The driver's door opened and a woman stepped out, hands raised and empty. "Don't shoot!" her voice carried across the distance. "My name is Claire Dawson. I'm an attorney, and I'm here to speak with Daniel Cole." Martinez approached carefully, her weapon still drawn. "Ms. Dawson, this is a secure federal facility. You need to leave immediately. I have information about the case, information that Mr. Cole needs to hear." "Then you can provide that information through official channels. Right now you're trespassing and interfering with a federal investigation. And you're making a mistake if you don't listen to what I have to say." The woman, Claire, pulled something from her pocket, moving slowly to avoid triggering a violent response. "I have documentation here that proves the man who called Mr. Cole this afternoon is Marcus Vance, CEO of Vance International Logistics. He's been using his legitimate shipping business as cover for trafficking operations across 3 continents." Martinez didn't lower her weapon. "If you have evidence of criminal activity, You need to submit it to the FBI's tip line. I tried that 6 months ago, and somehow my report got buried, lost in the system, and I received a very polite call suggesting I might want to reconsider my allegations unless I enjoyed facing defamation lawsuits. Claire took a step forward, and immediately 3 agents adjusted their aim. She froze. I'm trying to help you. Marcus Vance has been operating with impunity for years because he has people inside law enforcement, inside federal agencies, inside places that are supposed to stop people like him. But if Rebecca Walsh testifies, if her testimony is corroborated by what your suspects are telling you, then maybe, finally, someone can build a case that sticks. Why come here? Martinez demanded. Why not go through proper channels? Because proper channels keep getting compromised. Because 6 months ago I watched a friend, a woman who'd escaped Vance's operation, disappear after she agreed to talk to the FBI. Because I don't trust that your secure communication channels are actually secure. Claire's voice carried a desperation that cut through the tension. I'm risking my career, possibly my life, by being here. But if I can help protect Mr. Cole and his son, if I can help make sure Rebecca Walsh lives long enough to testify, then it's worth it. Martinez lowered her weapon slightly, though she didn't holster it. Who's your friend? The woman who disappeared? Her name was Jennifer Huang. She contacted the Portland field office last March, said she had information about a trafficking network. 2 agents came to interview her. A week later, her apartment was empty and her phone was disconnected. The FBI claimed she'd moved voluntarily, but I know Jennifer. She wouldn't have run, not when she was finally ready to talk. The name seemed to mean something to Martinez. Her expression shifted, something like recognition mixed with concern. Jennifer Huang. Asian female, mid-30s, worked as a bookkeeper. You know her? I know we had a witness by that name who went missing. The case was closed as a voluntary departure, but I always thought there was more to it. Martinez finally holstered her weapon and gestured for Claire to approach. You have 5 minutes to show me what you've got, and if this is some kind of trick, you'll regret it. Daniel watched from the window as Claire was escorted into the farmhouse, flanked by agents who searched her thoroughly before allowing her into the living room. She was younger than he'd expected from her voice, maybe early 30s, with sharp features and eyes that suggested she hadn't slept properly in weeks. Mr. Cole, she said when she saw him, I'm sorry to intrude like this, but I need you to understand what you're dealing with. She spread documents across the coffee table, bank statements, shipping manifests, emails, photographs. Martinez leaned over them, her expression growing darker with each page she examined. This is comprehensive, Martinez said quietly. How did you get all this? I was Vance's attorney, corporate counsel, handling his legitimate business interests. But about a year ago, I started noticing irregularities, payments that didn't match services rendered, shipping routes that made no economic sense, encrypted communications that my security clearance wasn't high enough to access. Claire's hands were shaking slightly as she pointed to specific documents. When I started asking questions, I was told to focus on my assigned cases. When I kept pushing, I was offered a promotion, contingent on me signing an NDA so broad it would have prevented me from ever speaking about anything I'd seen. That's when I knew something was deeply wrong. So you started investigating on your own, Martinez said. I started documenting every suspicious transaction, every unexplained shipment, every piece of evidence that suggested Vance International wasn't just moving cargo. Claire pulled out a ledger, its pages covered in handwritten notes. This is Jennifer's work. She was Vance's bookkeeper before she escaped. She kept this record of every transaction she processed, every payment she logged. It's a roadmap of his entire operation. Martinez picked up the ledger carefully, flipping through pages. If this is authentic, it's authentic. Jennifer was meticulous. She knew she'd need proof if she ever found the courage to speak up. Then where is she? Why isn't she here presenting this herself? Claire's expression crumpled. Because I think she's dead. I think whoever Vance has inside the FBI identified her as a threat and eliminated her before she could testify. And I think the same thing will happen to Rebecca Walsh if you don't move faster than they expect. The room fell silent, everyone processing the implications. If Claire was right, if the trafficking network really did have people inside federal law enforcement, then every move Martinez made could potentially be compromised. Every safe house location, every witness interview, every strategic decision could be reported back to the people they were trying to catch. Agent Martinez, Daniel said slowly, when you came to help us last night, how many people knew about it? How many agents did you read into the operation? Martinez met his eyes, and he saw the moment she understood where he was going. Standard tactical team, 12 agents plus support staff, maybe 20 people total. And they all knew where we'd be? Where you were sending us? Not all of them. The safe house location was need to know. Maybe 5 people had that information. And today? How many people know we're at this farmhouse? More. We had to coordinate the emergency relocation, bring in additional security, maybe 15, 20 people. Then we're not safe here either, Daniel said. If Claire's right, if Vance really has someone inside, then he probably knows exactly where we are right now. As if summoned by his words, the lights went out. Not just in the farmhouse, but across the entire property. Security lights, perimeter lighting, everything going dark in an instant. Through the window, Daniel could see confusion among the agents outside, flashlights clicking on, radios crackling with urgent communication. That's not a power failure, Martinez said, already moving toward the door. That's a deliberate attack. Everyone stay... The explosion cut off her words, a massive detonation from somewhere on the property's edge that lit up the night sky and sent shockwaves rippling across the fields. Daniel's ears rang from the blast, and through the ringing he could hear shouting, gunfire, the sound of vehicles approaching fast. They found us, Claire whispered, her face pale in the emergency lighting that had activated inside the farmhouse. Oh God, they actually found us. Martinez was on her radio, coordinating response, calling for backup that Daniel knew wouldn't arrive in time. Whatever was coming now, and they had maybe minutes before this farmhouse became another crime scene, another tragedy, another failure of protection that cost innocent lives. Eli! Daniel shouted, searching for his son in the chaos. Eli, where are you? Here, Dad. His son's voice surprisingly calm from the kitchen. What's happening? What was happening was the nightmare scenario every protected witness fears, the moment when hiding stops being enough and the only option left is to run or fight. Daniel grabbed his son, pulled him close, and made a decision. We're leaving. Now. Mr. Cole, you need to stay inside, Martinez started. Staying inside didn't help Rebecca when they buried her. It didn't help Jennifer Huang when she disappeared. And it's not going to help us when whoever's attacking this place comes through that door. Daniel looked at Claire. You have a car. Yes, but then that's our exit. Martinez, you can come with us, or you can coordinate your defense here, but my son and I are not sitting still to become targets. For a moment he thought Martinez would refuse, would order them to stay, would try to enforce some kind of federal authority that meant nothing when people were actively trying to kill you. But then another explosion rocked the property, closer this time, and she nodded sharply. Go. Take the back exit, cut through the cornfield to where Ms. Dawson's car is parked. I'll buy you time. Agent Martinez, go, Mr. Cole. And when you're clear, call the number I'm about to give you. It's my direct supervisor, someone I trust absolutely. Tell him everything. She scribbled a number on a scrap of paper, thrust it at Daniel. Make this count. They ran. The cornfield swallowed them whole, stalks dry and brittle from the late season pressing close on all sides, cutting visibility to mere feet. Daniel kept one hand clamped on Eli's shoulder and the other gripping Claire's jacket as they crashed through the rows, the sound of their passage absurdly loud against the backdrop of gunfire and shouting behind them. Every instinct screamed at Daniel to move faster, but the darkness and uneven ground made speed impossible without risking a fall that could cost them everything. How far to your car? Daniel gasped, his injured shoulder screaming protest with each jarring step. Maybe 200 yards, Claire panted. I parked on the service road, tried to stay off the main approach. Behind them, another explosion lit up the sky, closer than the previous ones. The shockwave rippled through the corn, and Daniel felt the heat of it even at this distance. Martinez was buying them time, but time was measured in seconds now, not minutes. They burst out of this cornfield onto a narrow dirt road, and there was Claire's Honda, exactly where she'd left it. She fumbled with her keys, hands shaking so badly she dropped them twice before managing to unlock the doors. Daniel shoved Eli into the back seat and climbed in after him while Claire threw herself behind the wheel. "Drive," Daniel ordered. "Don't stop. Don't slow down. Just drive." The engine turned over, and Claire floored the accelerator before Daniel had even closed his door properly. Gravel sprayed from the tires as they fishtailed onto the service road, the Honda's modest engine whining as Claire pushed it to its limits. In the rearview mirror, Daniel could see flames rising from the farmhouse, could see the silhouettes of vehicles and armed figures moving through the chaos they'd just escaped. "Where are we going?" Claire's voice was high and tight with panic. "We're safe if they can find us anywhere." "Nowhere's safe," Daniel said bluntly. He pulled out his phone, saw Martinez's scrawled number, and dialed. It rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, a man's voice answered, gruff and annoyed at being called at this hour. "Deputy Director Morrison." "Sir, my name is Daniel Cole. Agent Sandra Martinez told me to call you. She said you're someone she trusts absolutely." "Martinez?" The annoyance vanished, replaced by sharp attention. "What's happened? Where is she?" "Coordinating defense at a farmhouse outside Portland that's currently under attack by the trafficking organization we've been running from. She sent me to call you because she thinks there's a leak inside the FBI, someone feeding information to Marcus Vance." The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Daniel thought the call had dropped. Then Morrison's voice came back harder and colder than before. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." So Daniel did.